My boyfriend called me too emotional and hung up on me during the worst night of my life. He left a voicemail afterward that was so cruel. I knew I had to do something. So I called the one person who could put him in his place, his mother. If you've ever been called too emotional for having feelings, hit that like button right now. And stick around because this story has a twist that'll make you believe in instant karma. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Let me start by telling you about Jake. We'd been together for 2 years, and on the surface everything looked perfect. He was the kind of guy who prided himself on being logical and rational. Whenever I got upset about something, he'd roll his eyes and say things like, "You're being too emotional about this," or, "Can we just think about this logically?" At first, I thought he was helping me see things more clearly. I actually believed I was the problem. Jake hated what he called drama. If I wanted to talk about my feelings, he'd shut down. If I cried during a movie, he'd make jokes about how women get so worked up over nothing. I started keeping my emotions to myself, thinking that made me a better girlfriend. Looking back now, I realize I was slowly disappearing piece by piece. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that Tuesday night in March. I got a call that changed everything. My grandmother, the woman who raised me after my parents died when I was 8, had collapsed at home and was being rushed to the hospital. The paramedics told me it looked like a massive stroke, and I needed to get there immediately. I was shaking as I called Jake. I could barely get the words out between sobs. "Jake, I need you. My grandmother is in the hospital, and they don't know if she's going to make it. Can you please come pick me up? I can't drive like this." There was this long pause, and then he said in the coldest voice I'd ever heard from him, "Sarah, you're being too emotional. I can't deal with this right now. Just call an Uber or something." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Jake, this is my grandmother. The woman who raised me. She might be dying. And you're telling me I'm being too emotional." "Look," he said, and I could hear the irritation in his voice. "Getting hysterical isn't going to help anything. You need to calm down and think logically about this situation." And then he hung up on me. He actually hung up on me while I was having the worst moment of my life. I sat there in my apartment, staring at my phone in complete shock. The person who was supposed to love me, supposed to support me, had just abandoned me when I needed him most. I felt so alone, so small, so completely worthless. But I didn't have time to process it because I had to get to the hospital. The next few hours were a blur of medical terms I didn't understand and waiting room coffee that tasted like cardboard. My grandmother was in surgery, and the doctors weren't giving me much hope. I kept checking my phone, thinking maybe Jake would call to apologize or at least check on me. Nothing. Around midnight, as I was curled up in an uncomfortable hospital chair, my phone buzzed. Jake had left me a voicemail. For a split second, I felt this wave of relief. Maybe he'd come to his senses. Maybe he was calling to say he was on his way. I put the phone to my ear and pressed play. What I heard next will be burned into my memory forever. It started off with this fake concerned tone. "Hey Sarah, I hope your grandmother is okay." But then his voice changed completely. "Look, I've been thinking about this and I need to say some things. You're always overreacting to everything. Every little thing becomes this massive crisis with you. And honestly, I'm exhausted by it." My hands started shaking as I listened to him continue. "Your grandmother is old, Sarah. What did you expect? People get sick, people die. That's life. But you act like the world is ending every time something doesn't go perfectly." I couldn't breathe. This was the man I thought I loved, talking about my dying grandmother like she was nothing more than an inconvenience. But he wasn't done. "I'm tired of your constant neediness. I have my own life, my own problems, and I can't be your emotional support system every time you fall apart." Maybe you need therapy instead of a boyfriend, because this level of emotional instability isn't normal. The final blow came at the end. Get your emotions under control, Sarah, or we're done. I'm not going to waste any more of my time on someone who can't handle basic adult situations without having a breakdown. I listened to that voicemail 3 times, sitting alone in that hospital waiting room. Each time I felt something inside me breaking a little more. But by the 3rd time, something else started to grow. Anger. Pure white-hot anger. How dare he call my love for my grandmother emotional instability? How dare he reduce my pain to overreacting? This wasn't about being too emotional. This was about him being completely heartless. And that's when I remembered Dorothy, Jake's mother. She was this warm, kind woman who had always been so welcoming to me. She'd pull me aside at family dinners and tell me how happy she was that Jake had found someone like me. She'd say things like, "You're so good for him, Sarah. You help him be more caring, more open." If only she knew the truth about who her son really was behind closed doors. That's when the idea hit me. Dorothy had no idea how Jake treated the woman he claimed to love. She thought he was this caring, respectful man because that's the version of himself he showed her. But what if she heard the real Jake? What if she heard exactly what kind of person she had raised? The next morning, after spending the entire night at the hospital, I made a decision that would change everything. My grandmother was stable but still critical, and I was running on about 2 hours of sleep and pure adrenaline. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and dialed Dorothy's number. "Hi, Dorothy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to share something with you about Jake." "Oh, Sarah. Of course, dear. You know you can call me anytime. Is everything all right? You sound upset." "Actually, Dorothy, I think you need to hear something. Jake left me a voicemail last night, and I think as his mother, you should know the kind of person he really is." I could hear the concern in her voice. "What do you mean, honey?" Without another word, I put the phone on speaker and played Jake's voicemail. Every cruel word, every dismissive comment, every heartless insult. I watched the seconds tick by as Dorothy listened to her son reveal who he truly was. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Finally, Dorothy spoke, and her voice was barely a whisper. That doesn't sound like my Jake." "It is, Dorothy. This is who he becomes when no one else is listening." I could hear her starting to cry. "Sarah, I am so sorry. I had no idea. Your poor grandmother, how is she?" As I explained what had happened, I could hear Dorothy getting more and more upset. Then she said something that broke my heart. When Jake was 12, his father walked out on us right after I was diagnosed with breast cancer. He told me I was too much work, and that he couldn't handle the drama of my illness. I spent years terrified that Jake would turn into his father, and I thought I had raised him better than that. Her voice was getting stronger now, filled with a mother's disappointment and rage. "But hearing him talk to you the way his father talked to me, I failed. I failed as a mother, and I failed you." "Dorothy, this isn't your fault." "No, Sarah. It is. And I'm going to fix this right now. Stay on the line." Before I could protest, I heard the sound of another number being dialed. Dorothy was calling Jake, and she was keeping me on a 3-way call. Jake had no idea I was listening. "Jake, it's your mother. We need to talk." "Mom? Is everything okay? It's pretty early. I just listened to the voicemail you left Sarah last night." Dead silence. "Jake? Did you hear me?" Mom, I don't know what Sarah told you, but she didn't tell me anything, Jake. She played me your actual voicemail. Your voice, your words, your cruelty." Dorothy's voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from her before. It was the voice of a mother whose heart had been shattered by her own child's actions. I raised you better than this, Jacob. I raised you to be kind, to be supportive, to be the kind of man who would never abandon someone he loves when they need him most. Instead, you've become exactly what I feared you would become. You've become your father. Mom, that's not fair. You don't understand the situation. What situation, Jake? That the woman you supposedly love was watching her grandmother die and needed your support? That she called you crying and you hung up on her? That you left her a voicemail calling her emotionally unstable for grieving? Jake tried to defend himself, but every excuse just made him sound worse. Dorothy wasn't having any of it. How dare you treat someone the way your father treated us? How dare you call her needy when she needed you most? Do you remember what it felt like when your father abandoned us during my cancer treatment? Do you remember how that felt, Jake? I could hear Jake getting flustered, trying to explain himself, but Dorothy cut him off. You're going to call Sarah right now and apologize. Not because I'm telling you to, but because it's the right thing to do. And then you're going to take a long, hard look at the man you've become and decide if that's really who you want to be. Because if this is who you are, then I don't recognize my own son anymore. Jake called me about an hour later. I almost didn't answer, but I was curious to see if Dorothy had actually gotten through to him. Sarah? It's Jake. Look, my mom called me and I think maybe I was too harsh last night. Too harsh. That was his apology. Not, I'm sorry for abandoning you. Or, I was completely wrong. Just that he was too harsh. Jake, you told me I needed therapy instead of a boyfriend while my grandmother was dying. You called me emotionally unstable for crying about the woman who raised me potentially dying. That wasn't harsh, that was cruel. Okay, I'm sorry. I was stressed about work, and I didn't handle it well. Can we just move past this? And that's when I knew without a doubt that this relationship was over. He still didn't get it. He still thought my feelings were the problem, not his complete lack of empathy. No, Jake. We can't move past this. This isn't about one bad night. This is about who you really are when things get difficult. And I deserve better than someone who thinks caring about my family is a character flaw. Sarah, come on. Don't be dramatic about this. Even then, even in his supposed apology, he was still calling me dramatic for having standards. We're done, Jake. Don't call me again. The most beautiful part of this whole story is what happened next. Dorothy called me back later that day to check on my grandmother and to apologize again for her son's behavior. But instead of just apologizing, she did something amazing. Sarah, she said, I know you and Jake are over, and honestly, I don't blame you. But I hope that doesn't mean we have to be strangers. You've been more of a daughter to me these past 2 years than Jake has been a son, and I'd hate to lose that relationship because of his mistakes. Dorothy and I still talk regularly. She visits my grandmother sometimes, and they've become great friends. Jake, on the other hand, lost both of us that day. He's tried to reach out a few times, but Dorothy told him that until he does some serious work on himself, he's not welcome at family events. The best part? My grandmother made a full recovery. The doctors called it miraculous, but I think she's just too stubborn to let something like a stroke keep her down. When I told her the whole story, she laughed and said, Well, honey, sounds like you finally learned the difference between a man and a boy. She was right. I learned that being called too emotional by someone who can't handle basic human empathy isn't an insult. It's a compliment. It means you still have your heart intact. And that's something worth protecting. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, your emotions are valid, and anyone who calls you too emotional for having feelings isn't the right person for you. Subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself, and let me know in the comments. Have you ever had someone dismiss your emotions? I read every single one. See you in the next story.